Hello, and welcome to the course of U.S. history. I am once again your host, Mr. Samuelson. Last time we were together, we looked at Christopher Columbus and his establishment of the first permanent colonies in the Americas and at his subsequent failure as a leader. Today, we're going to be looking at other European nations, well, the Spanish as well, but also France and Britain, and how they get started with this exploration of the New World. So let's get to it. First, let's look a little bit more on the exploration side of the Spanish. This really gets going once Columbus has completed the conquest of Hispaniola. Once this island is captured and thoroughly under Spanish rule, they then have a base from which to launch other missions of exploration and of conquest. From Hispaniola, the Spanish will jump out and they'll conquer Cuba and Jamaica and Puerto Rico. They also establish control of a lot of the Bahamas. And as I said a moment ago, they're going to use this as a launching point for conquest of mainland territories. Now, the way the Spanish are able to do this and do this so successfully is because they have, one, guns. Gunpowder is a very formidable weapon in warfare. And two, horses. The Native Americans had no horses prior to the arrival of the Americans, and this is a tremendous weapon, both in combat and for overall speed, which is an advantage that the Spanish have and use to great effect on the Native Americans. However, the greatest possible advantage that the Spanish had was in disease. Native Americans were severely weakened by European and African Asian diseases, old world diseases. They had never encountered these before and had therefore very little resistance to them. Smallpox was perhaps the most devastating of those diseases. Now, with smallpox as the leader, but also typhoid and a few others, within a few years, 50 to 90% of the Native American populations that came in contact with these diseases would die off. 50 to 90%. 50% on the low end being half of your population. That's devastating enough, but in some communities that number jumped as high as 90% of the native population dying of disease. 1 in 10 surviving. No community can really withstand that level of mortality, that death rate, within a short period of time. It was devastating to native societies and left them completely unable to resist European attacks and advancement. So those few Native American survivors were then victim to enslavement. And many of them found their way into Spanish gold mines on Hispaniola and would subsequently die of mistreatment and malnourishment within those mines. So we find ourselves in the Caribbean within 20 years of the arrival of the Spanish, a dramatic decrease in native population. It's estimated that when Columbus arrived, there were about 3 million Native Americans in the Caribbean, and that 20 years later, that number is down to about 30,000. That is a tremendous loss of life. Now, let's look at some other Spanish exploration. We're going to mention Balboa. Balboa is famous for one thing, and that is that continuation of the search for a route to Asia and India. This is what the Spanish had hoped to do with Columbus at the beginning, find a route to Asia, and they never really lose sight of that goal. Remember, this was their view of the world, and we don't yet know that there's necessarily a continent there, although Amerigo Vespucci is helping us to learn that. And as they start to realize that there's a continent here, they start to ask the natives about, what's on the other side? And the natives in this region of the world start to tell them, oh yeah, there's another great ocean, there's another great sea, it's right on the other side of this land. And Vasco Núñez de Balboa in 1513, gets a group of Native Americans to act as guides, and they walk from the Caribbean coast to the Pacific Ocean, right across the Isthmus of Panama, one of the narrowest, or the narrowest point between the Caribbean and the Pacific Ocean. And Balboa becomes the first European to see the Pacific Ocean, and does something which I love that the Spanish have the audacity to do this. He walks into the Pacific Ocean and claims the ocean and everything it touches for the Spanish Empire. The whole ocean, just by walking into it. That's pretty cool. Kind of ridiculous, but he claimed it anyway. Now, the Spanish have claimed the Pacific Ocean. It's time to find out what it is that they've actually claimed. And to do this, Ferdinand Magellan is called upon to sail around the world. He's going to be the first to sail a fleet into the Pacific Ocean, and not just into it, he's going to cross it and then sail all the way back around to Spain. A very ambitious journey to sail around the world. And perhaps even more ambitious, he planned to survive that. Let's see if he does. In 1519, he's going to leave Spain with a very well-equipped fleet. He's got 5 ships. He's got 241 men. So he's got a sizable fleet. He's got a lot of crew. He's in good position to do this voyage and to do it well. He is well-equipped for a voyage around the world. Now, he encounters difficulty. By this time, 1519, 1520, Spain has got a decent sense of the coast of South America. But he sails all the way down, and he wants to make it through as short as possible. And he finds this little causeway here, this path between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. Now, this winds up being very difficult, because as the tide shifts from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean, and all this water flows from one way to the other, this becomes very rough sea and difficult to navigate through. And then the same is true once the tide passes and we've got the Atlantic Ocean flowing back into the Pacific Ocean. And you've got really rough sea, waves as high as 50 feet in this region, which is tough enough today, but imagine doing this on a little caravel. It's very difficult to navigate through that, and it takes Magellan quite a while to do it. But he eventually does get through the Straits of Magellan, named for him, and got to the Pacific Ocean, survived that part of his voyage. And once he gets into the Pacific Ocean, he actually names it the Pacific Ocean, the peaceful ocean. Pacific is peaceful. So we've got the Pacific Ocean named by Magellan upon crossing through the straits and being so relieved that he's got this nice, big, wide, flat ocean. He's got some easy sailing. What a peaceful ocean to sail. And he does hope that this will take him nice and smooth right across over to Asia. His problem, though, is that at this time, nobody knew how large the Pacific Ocean was. They had an idea that it might be about as wide as the Atlantic Ocean. But in fact, it's more than 3 times the width of the Atlantic Ocean. This is an incredible journey. And he's got these ships out in the open sea. He comes upon islands periodically, so it's not completely separated from land, but it is not an easy voyage. And supplies run low. And his men are getting past the point of being crazy about the fact that they can't find any mainland. It is a very difficult voyage. It was a lot harder to cross that Pacific Ocean than Magellan thought it would be. But he does survive that part of the voyage. He makes it across the Pacific Ocean, and he winds up in the East Indies. And he stops at the Philippines. Well, here our story is going to take a little turn for Magellan. You see, he stopped off at the Philippines to resupply. And while there, he sees an opportunity. There is a tribal conflict between a couple of groups, and he convinces one of the groups to convert to Christianity, pledge their loyalty to the King of Spain, and Magellan would help them. Well, the other group didn't take kindly to that, and Magellan's men are attacked. And in that attack, Magellan himself is killed. Yeah, Magellan, you're famous for being the first man to sail all the way around the world, but you don't actually make it. Yeah, you didn't survive that. Sorry, man. But your mission is still, historically speaking, looked at as a success because after 3 years of sailing, a single ship, one ship, with 18 of the original 241 sailors makes it back to Spain. 18. They had a rough time crossing the Indian Ocean as well. A lot of piracy, and the Portuguese didn't like them being there too much. But the Spanish make it back. Well, 18 of them do. And Magellan's voyage, if not Magellan himself, has crossed the world, the first to sail around it. All right, so let's look at some others. The English. Just a few years after Columbus, the English start thinking, hey, let's get in on this too. Let's see if we can sail around the world. Let's see if we can sail to Asia. And the English are going to jump on board, and they're going to get to it. And they hire an Italian sailor, right? It worked for the Spanish. Columbus was Italian. So, hey, maybe the Italians are the way to go. They hired John Cabot, and he's going to lead a voyage just 5 years after Columbus's first voyage, 1497, and he's going to try to reach Asia for the English. Remember, in 1497, they still thought that Columbus was in Asia. They did not know it was a new continent. So Cabot lands in Canada. He thought it was in Asia. He thought he was successful. He thought he had made it all the way around to the other side of the world, and he was going to be able to meet the Chinese and see their wealth and trade for their spices and their goods. But he's in Canada, and he looks around and he sees a lot of frozen forests, and he thinks, this is not what Marco Polo had led me to believe. This does not look like the wealth of Asia to me. Well, he goes back to England and he says, hey, I landed in Asia. I wasn't able to find China. I wasn't able to find this wealthy kingdom that Marco Polo spoke of, but let's check and see a few details. Let's work on our navigation. Let's see if we can do it again. And so he sets off for a second voyage. We don't know much about Cabot's second voyage. We know that he was sent off with 5 ships, and that at one point, one of them is damaged. It's damaged to the point where they don't think it's worthwhile for it to continue, so it turns around and it returns back to England. The other 4 ships, nobody ever sees them again. And it's somewhat of a historical mystery. They may have been caught and sunk in a storm. They may have landed somewhere and been attacked and killed. We don't know. Cabot's second voyage is a failure, and we don't know whatever happened to John Cabot. Let's look at the French. The French are going to get in on this age of exploration quite a bit later than the others. By the time they're there, we have this general understanding that there's another continent, that there are a North and South America and a Caribbean. And the French, coming from France right here, are not all that interested in North America. They want to sail around it and get to the other side and get over to Asia. That is the goal of the French. And they send Giovanni de Verrazzano to explore for possible routes. So he hits the east coast of America and he's sailing up here. He's looking for possible passageways, something that might lead into the continent and through the continent. That is his goal. But of course, he doesn't find anything along the east coast of what is currently the United States and sails back to France. Decade later, Jacques Cartier is going to do a similar thing, and he's going to go into the Gulf of St. Lawrence and up the St. Lawrence River, again with the goal that maybe this American continent is not that wide. Maybe this is a passageway, not just a river, that can get me through to the other side. But again, North American geography doesn't work out that way for him, and he has not discovered a passage to Asia. He has just sailed into the North American continent. Later on, France will use this exploration in particular to make some claims and start some colonization, but that's a little bit in the future still. France was most interested in a Northwest Passage. They never found it. Turns out it does kind of exist. You can get to Asia by sailing through these islands, but we're now so far north that for much of the year, most of the year, this is frozen solid. And a caravel is not going to break through ice as it sails. So sailing a Northwest Passage in the 15, 16, even 1700s is just not possible. You need much stronger ships in order to sail that. And so the French never do find a Northwest Passage. And for a time, they give up interest in North America. They'll get that interest again, but that's for another day. Next time, however, we're going to go back to the Spanish. And we're going to leave exploration behind, and we're going to look at Spanish conquest. And in particular, we're going to look closer at the Spanish conquest of the Aztec and Incan empires and really look at how they accomplished that feat. That's all for this time. Thank you very much for joining me, and farewell.